Holmgren is coming in over the line with prop back to Holmgren. He shoots and scores! Talking about pretty plays, that was the next one.
I've said this for many, many years, and Paul and I were teammates a long time ago. Throughout his career, he put the fear of God in a lot of players. You knew that if he was coming in and you had the puck, you were going to get hit because that's just him.
Paul started in '75 and was a tough guy, but he was a competitor. He wanted to win all the time.
From facing Clark Gillies and Nick Fotiu to standing toe-to-toe with Dave Schultz, Paul Holmgren feared no one and was always ready to settle things with his fists. Today, we dive into the stories of a giant standing 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing over 200 pounds, a force of nature on ice that even the toughest fighters in the NHL had to think twice about. As analysts who covered that era put it, Paul Holmgren operated at the heavyweight level, where fights were scheduled before the opening puck drop and nobody needed a reason to drop the gloves. May 24th, 1980. Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Philadelphia Flyers and the New York Islanders at Nassau Coliseum. The Islanders led the series 3-2, just one win away from their first championship in history. The stakes could not have been higher. Late in the third period, the tension boiled over. Holmgren threw a hard cross-check at an Islanders player. Clark Gillies, 6 feet 3 inches, 210 pounds, and widely considered the most feared fighter on the Islanders roster, came charging in immediately, slashing Holmgren across the body as a warning. Without a moment's hesitation, both heavyweights dropped their gloves and went at each other, in the middle of a Stanley Cup Final. Gillies was known for one of the most powerful right hands in the game at that time. The two men exchanged thunderous punches directly to each other's faces, neither backing down, until both crashed to the ice. Each received a 5-minute fighting major. This was not a regular season game. This was the biggest stage in hockey, and Holmgren did not blink. As journalist David Salter wrote in the Hockey News in 2012, those clashes between the enforcer legends of that era, especially the battles involving Terry O'Reilly, Paul Holmgren, and Clark Gillies, belong in the mythology of the NHL. That was a time when games were decided with blood and tears. March 16, 1977. The Philadelphia Flyers traveled to Madison Square Garden to face their bitter rivals, the New York Rangers. It was the height of Atlantic Division hostility. On the Rangers' side stood Nick Fotiu, a legendary enforcer born in Staten Island, New York, and the symbol of physical dominance in New York hockey. Both Fotiu and Holmgren carried the same responsibility: protect their team's stars at all costs. A collision between these two forces was inevitable. The game was intense from the opening minutes. At 17 minutes and 4 seconds into the first period, a fierce, along-the-boards collision ignited the confrontation. Fotiu and Holmgren immediately locked onto each other. Without a word exchanged, both men simultaneously dropped their gloves, removed their helmets, and committed to a pure, bare-knuckle battle in the middle of Madison Square Garden. Fotiu was known for punches that, in the words of those who witnessed them, made opponents feel like their bones were being crushed. The two traded heavy right hooks repeatedly. Both men left the exchange battered and bruised, yet neither went down before the linesman stepped in. Each received a 5-minute fighting major and an additional 2 minutes for roughing. As veteran enforcer Doug Smith later reflected, Nick Fotiu was a force with absolute power. Facing him was like stepping into a meat grinder with no way out. The fact that Paul Holmgren was willing to drop the gloves squarely against Fotiu in the early years of his career defined his reputation as someone who feared nobody in the NHL. October 10, 1976. The Philadelphia Flyers hosted the Los Angeles Kings at the Spectrum. Just 11 days earlier, on September 29, 1976, Dave "The Hammer" Schultz, the most feared enforcer in Flyers history and the man who had built his entire legend in Philadelphia, was traded to the Los Angeles Kings. Now he was coming back to the building he once ruled, with one purpose: destroy the young rookie who had dared to take his place as the Flyers' enforcer. That rookie was Paul Holmgren. The game exploded in the second period when a heavy collision triggered a full bench-clearing brawl. In the chaos, Schultz hunted Holmgren down. What Schultz did not know, or chose to ignore, was that Holmgren was wearing a full face shield and helmet, recovering from serious corneal surgery from the previous season. One blow to that eye could have blinded him permanently. Schultz called him a one-eyed bastard and dared him to remove the protective gear and fight. Holmgren removed it, calmly, without hesitation. Using his superior height and reach, Holmgren completely overwhelmed the older enforcer. He landed 11 clean right-hand punches, while Schultz managed only one in return. Schultz went down to the ice as the Spectrum crowd erupted. The throne had changed hands. As Dave Schultz himself wrote in his autobiography, The Hammer, "I had gone after Holmgren. He was 6'3" and close to 215 pounds, while I was 6'1" and 190 pounds. Come on, you bastard, I had yelled. But that was not a smart decision on my part. He pounded me with a rain of right hands and knocked me to the ice. When he kept hitting my right eye and nose, the whole Spectrum went crazy cheering for him. In Philadelphia, I had suddenly become nobody." December 9th, 1981. The Philadelphia Flyers were facing the Pittsburgh Penguins in a heated rivalry game. On the Penguins side was Paul Baxter, one of the most notorious agitators in the league. Baxter repeatedly slashed, jabbed his stick into Holmgren's face, and used every dirty trick available. Yet every time Holmgren challenged him to fight, Baxter cowardly skated away or dropped to the ice to avoid the confrontation. The frustration reached its breaking point when referee Andy Van Hellemond assessed Holmgren an instigator penalty and ejected him from the game. As linesman Bob Hodges moved in to restrain and escort Holmgren off the ice, Holmgren reached over Hodges' shoulder and threw a hard punch directly into Van Hellemond's chest. The entire league was shaken. The NHL Officials Association threatened a full strike, refusing to work any further games if the punishment was not severe enough. What followed made history. Beginning with the 1982 to 1983 season, the NHL introduced a rule mandating an automatic suspension of at least 20 games for any player who physically assaulted an official. Paul Holmgren's actions that night directly forced the NHL to write a new rule, one that still stands in the league today. In his own words, Holmgren later explained, "He could do all his dirty work with his stick, but was too cowardly to fight. In the end, I punched Andy simply because I was so frustrated that I could not get my hands on Baxter." May 15th, 1980. Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final at the Spectrum. The Philadelphia Flyers against the New York Islanders. Everyone in the building expected Paul Holmgren to do what he always did: protect his teammates, intimidate the opposition, and enforce the code. What happened instead left the hockey world speechless. Holmgren caught fire against one of the most defensively disciplined teams in the league. He scored 3 consecutive goals past legendary goaltender Billy Smith, helping the Flyers demolish the Islanders by a score of 8-3 and level the series at 1 game apiece. With that performance, Holmgren etched his name permanently into the record books. He became the first American-born player in NHL history to score a hat trick in a Stanley Cup Final game. Sports analysts at the time struggled to find the right words. Here was a man who led the league in intimidation, who dropped the gloves against the toughest fighters alive, and who could also single-handedly destroy a team's championship hopes with his skill. As those analysts noted, no enforcer in NHL history had ever delivered a hat trick on the grandest stage of the sport. Holmgren was not just dangerous with his fists, he was dangerous in every possible way. June 23rd, 2011. Paul Holmgren was no longer on the ice. He was sitting in the general manager's office of the Philadelphia Flyers. But the mentality that made him one of the most feared players in NHL history had not gone anywhere. That summer, Holmgren made a decision that stunned the entire hockey world. Within hours of each other on the same day, he traded away the 2 biggest names on the roster. Captain Mike Richards was sent to the Los Angeles Kings. Leading scorer, Jeff Carter, was sent to the Columbus Blue Jackets. 2 faces of the franchise, gone in a single morning. No general manager in the NHL had dared to do something like this. The risk was enormous. It could have shattered the locker room culture, turned the fan base against the organization, and set the team back for years. It did not. In return, Holmgren brought in Jakub Voracek, Wayne Simmons, and Braden Shen, players who would form the backbone of a new era for the Flyers. As Broad Street Buzz analysed, decisive and unafraid to make the moves that most general managers would walk away from, Holmgren reconstructed a roster that had come within reach of the Stanley Cup. That same toughness defined his entire tenure in the Philadelphia front office. How many players in NHL history can say their actions forced the league to change its own rules? Like and subscribe to the channel so we can keep the conversation going.